All right, Marco, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love coming to this event and getting to meet a bunch of people. I wish we had had things like this when we graduated. When I graduated in 2007, 2008, it doesn't feel that long ago, but there's so much more sort of like emphasis and opportunities on going to early stage startups, which I'm obviously a huge believer in, and you should feel lucky. This one is a great event, so thank you.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Actually, I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
Let's start.
Glassdoor. I send Marco other startups to get his opinion because he knows a thing or two. And I think one of the first things that you do is you go and you do check Glassdoor. Tell me why you do that, and what do you think the people in the room can learn from those Glassdoor ratings where apparently you're doing very well?
Yeah. There is a bit of a trope that millennials are entitled. You guys have probably heard that. You've heard this sort of statement said about you guys in the media. And I actually think that's a cynical framing of something that is very true, which is that millennials, and I am one of these too, are highly demanding. You are a generation, we are a generation that has an enormous potential and opportunity, and therefore you're rightfully incredibly demanding of those around you, of the organizations that you deem worthy enough of your time. And so when we show up as a company and make a promise and say to you, hey, you can come here, you can learn, you can grow, you can contribute, you can make an impact, I think it's fair and appropriate for people to hold us to account. Honestly, I think it makes us better as an organization to foster that type of sort of open conversation internally. And I think Glassdoor is a place where you can gain some insight into that. You know, like all online reviews, they tend to skew ranty and ravey, and you know, the people who are just sort of like pretty happy, okay, don't tend to post. That sort of caveat included, I think you can get a sense of the flavor of a place, certainly in aggregate, when you go through and read these reviews. And I think that transparency is healthy. I think it makes people better, and it forces you to account for what you're good at and what you're not great at.
Awesome. So you went to school here in the city at Columbia. Mm-hmm. Can you take us through, when you're from the time you could have been in one of these chairs to when you founded Thumbtack? You know, how did you become a founder? What was the path along the way?
So I started college as a neuroscience major. It's what I was super passionate about. I took a ton of classes in sort of biology and neuroscience. And then I spent a summer in a lab. And I don't know how many of you guys have done this, but it is shockingly boring. It's like deeply boring. And I'm glad that people can do it. I realized it was not for me. It was sort of too narrow and monotonous. And so it was an incredibly disorienting feeling at the time, because something that I had sort of a lot of identity wrapped up in, sort of being a scientist, suddenly went away. And I started exploring random passions. One of those, randomly enough, was Social Security reform. So here we were, 2005, as a 20-year-old, getting so worked up about pension reform that I wrote a few op-eds for my student newspaper about Social Security reform. Now, that would have been an insignificant blip in my life had it not been for my future co-founder at the same time at Yale also getting super into Social Security reform. He went even so far as to start a student advocacy group that was involved in the Social Security debate that I then got recruited into because of what I had written. So we both took a semester off of college. We started the student advocacy group. We raised $1 million. We built a bunch of software for student campuses to advocate for reform, front page profile in the Wall Street Journal, and then zero impact on the national debate. And
your first failed startup.
Oh, it was just like a pure fail. And so that experience was incredible because it's A, where I met my co-founder, and B, just as importantly, it's where we got the spark and saw the excitement of building something out of nothing, rallying people around a shared dream and just going for it, and just how intoxicating that was. So the advice I often have for people coming out of school is, following your passions can actually be a pretty bad strategy. because your passions may not be ones that the world cares about, and you should take that into account when you're thinking about what to do. But following your passions is often a great way to meet passionate people. And that was certainly true for me. I did not make a career out of student advocacy for Social Security reform, but it is where I met my incredibly passionate co-founders, and through that ended up starting Thumbtack. And so the kernel of Thumbtack started in the sort of 2007. We were sort of seniors in college, and we did what you're not supposed to do, which is decide to start a business and then go hunt for an idea. Typically, that's bad advice because you end up solving a problem nobody cares about. But if you sort of look outside yourselves, which is what we did at the time, and say, you know, what's broken in the world? And even more so, what's inevitably going to be fixed? And how can we help bring that future about? I think you can find good things to go do. And so the observation that led to Thumbtack was, you know, why is it so hard to hire a plumber? You know, typically, the universe makes it very easy for you to part with your money to get what you want. Like, we're all lazy fundamentally, and capitalism has sort of narrowed the gap between our desires and getting what we want. And yet here was a category that you had to work hard to spend money. And it wasn't just plumbers, it wasn't just home services, it was all local professionals. And what we realized was that one of the greatest source of sort of resources in this country, in the world, human capital, the time and talent that we all have, was locked up and was hard to trade, was hard to buy and sell. And so we had this sort of very idealistic notion that if we could come in and build a software platform, you know, a marketplace experience that could enable the buying and selling of time, and more practically the buying and selling of local services, we could solve a giant problem and build a big company and have a huge impact. And so that sort of idealistic, naively big dream is what sparked it all. And I think that was key to having the success that we've had and being willing to persevere as long as we have.
Thank you. So it's funny because it actually relates to that Steve Jobs point of not being able to connect the dots looking forward, neuroscience to Social Security reform, to home services.
I've been asked and forced to connect the dots. Looking back at the time,
you can.
There's no way.
It's amazing. Can you give us a quick baseline on Thumbtack
Sure.
and the size of the company today from a couple different angles, so
Yeah.
that the students understand how big you are?
Absolutely. So Thumbtack now serves more than 250,000 businesses on the platform. These are registered, active, and paying businesses that we're driving over $1 billion a year worth of customer jobs. These folks represent everybody from carpenters, caterers, tutors, really any and all local services that provide services to customers. And today, Thumbtack is a matchmaking engine. We're a marketplace. So a customer comes in, and historically, we would have been presented with names and numbers. But that's actually incredibly inefficient, right? If you think of a directory or a classified site, you have to do all the work of finding who's available, who's interested, who's qualified. And so we built a system that, by understanding what the customer wants, we can sort of instantaneously match that with the right professional for the job, who can then quote, and out of these millions of quotes a month, the median quote is now coming in under 15 minutes. So 50% of these quotes are coming under 15 minutes, such that we can deliver to customers relevant and actionable options faster than anybody else. And the exciting part is that this is just the start. This matchmaking is just the start of our vision, because our goal is to get customers to done, to help them accomplish their projects. And getting you connected with the right pro is the first step, but over time you're going to see us really build out the scheduling infrastructure, communication, payments, everything that sort of supports the buyer and seller working together, and through that, the seller running their entire business, such that we can be a platform for these folks throughout their business needs. And so we have a long way to go. It's a $700 billion market. That's what customers in the United States spend on local services every year. We're capturing single-digit billions of that today, so have a long way to grow into. And the fun part is we're just hitting our stride now. The business has been around since 2009, but only in the last sort of 2 years have we accrued the sort of team, the data, the infrastructure, the money, the momentum to really be achieving this vision every day. And that's just incredibly exciting. So we are 245 people, 250 people in San Francisco. The bulk of that is across engineering, design, product, and marketing. And then we have an operations team in Salt Lake City of about 240 people there as well, where we service all the customer support inquiries that come in.
That's actually a pretty small company to be managing billions of dollars in new business for 250,000 other businesses. There's some incredible leverage there.
Yeah, it's the power of software, right? And it's the power of online distribution channels. And it's, I think, the exciting moment that we now live in. The internet has existed for decades now. Smartphones are reaching their first decade, just past their first decade. But what's happening now is sort of intelligence and connectivity is seeping into the real world. Cars, buildings, people, and with that, you get to remix things and organize things in fundamentally different and better ways than they ever could have been done before. And that transition really only happens once, right? Going from not aware to aware or not digital to digital. Yeah, that's a binary sort of shift, and we all get to live through that. And sort of many of you in this room will be part of building that. We certainly feel like a great amount of pride and excitement at getting to do that because the impact that you can have is tremendous. We have about 100 engineers at the company. If you think about that, there's 250,000, so that leverage is immense around the amount of businesses that any one engineer is supporting in that effort, and you get to build on it because we have this infrastructure and ever more this product experience that we can scaffold up on. The impact actually only gets greater over time. So we are lucky to be building what we're building today.
Very few companies can throw out a market size of hundreds of billions of dollars. The local space is one that venture capital firms have been chasing for a very long time and still are only scratching the surface of. And Thumbtack is really the first company in this area to break out with a software solution and start to gobble up that market share in terms of billions. Interestingly, I worked on serving local ads when I started at Google. I think we launched our effort there in 2003, 2004 to give you a sense for how long technology companies have been trying to solve this. And in some ways, Thumbtack's actually the largest vertical of the search business that's out there. It's pretty exciting. Thumbtack is also a marketplace, and I think it'd be great to dive into the idea of marketplaces. Marketplaces are particularly interesting, again, to investors and I think also to employees who are thinking about joining companies because there's an incredible amount of differentiation and barriers to entry once you get a marketplace to liquidity. But maybe, Marco, you could talk a bit about how you guys solved that chicken and egg problem, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of hard work.
So my quip when I don't have to answer that question is to say, you steal chickens and you build a chicken farm. That's how you get over the chicken and the egg problem. And that's actually kind of true. So the reality is all marketplaces are jump-started. They don't just show up into existence sort of humming with both sides, happy with the amount of liquidity that there is. You kind of have to hack it. You have to grow it somehow. And one of the key insights that we had is that we had to create value for our professionals, the supply side, independent of bringing them customers. Because day one, we had no customers. And as we started sort of talking to these folks and sort of watching their behavior, something we saw is that many of them were struggling to post their ads onto Craigslist. A, it was annoying to remember to do it every 3 days. B, most of these folks didn't know sort of HTML markup to sort of add in pictures and make it look nice. And 3, because it was something that they had to keep reposting, they didn't accrue any real reputational data as part of this profile, be it reviews or pictures or credentials. And so what we saw as the opportunity was to go to a professional and say, hey Joe, hey Jane, if you create a profile on Thumbtack, we'll give you an easy way to post a high quality ad on Craigslist for free. And these pros were very enticed by that. So we were able to recruit these folks with that sort of simple tool. And in offering this tool, it brought on tens of thousands of professionals who then created the content and ultimately the magnet that we could use to attract more customers. And then a few years in, it got to the point where there were enough customers coming in the door that we could use them as the main recruitment tool to get more pros, and that meant that the flywheel finally got spinning. But honestly, it took us the better part of 4 years to get that flywheel really spinning. It was, in retrospect, a pretty crazy thing to try and go do, but I'm glad we didn't know how hard it would be because we probably never would have tried. So being naive can be very helpful in certain regards.
So Thumbtacks has become a very successful company. No high fives at halftime, but obviously doing really, really well. So it makes it a little easier for me to ask this nasty question. You've said before that you were rejected 42 times when you went out to raise your Series A, 42 times. Don't look at me. Well, I know, yeah. And would love to hear what kept you and the team going. You know, how did you persevere through that type of experience?
Yeah. So Brian is referring to our Series A process. And to take you back, in June of 2010, we raised our angel round. We raised $1.2 million from sort of top flight group of angel investors in the Valley. We felt great about that. The advice that they kept whispering to us, which I thought was totally right, was, hey, solve the chicken and the egg problem. Show that you can really sort of get this flywheel spinning and sort of create liquidity on your marketplace, and you'll be good to go. And so we did that. We spent the next year and change grinding on that problem and doing a great job. And so come summer 2010, you know, we were feeling fucking great. We were feeling like, man, we did it. Like, these top flight people told us what to do. We went and did it. Now we're going to go raise the Series A, and it's going to be awesome. Well, it didn't go quite as planned. And the reason was pretty simple, actually. These angels had given us the advice as if they would be the next funders as well. This is what they were really focused on when we hadn't actually gone and done our homework about what did Series A investors like Brian that we went and talked to, what did they want to see? And the missing piece was monetization. So these investors said to us, hey, congrats guys, a ton of respect for what you've built in getting the flywheel going and starting to build liquidity on your marketplace, but how the hell are you going to make money? And you know, we had a story and we kept saying, you know, of course we're going to be able to make money. There's sort of these real transactions going through the system, and pros will always pay for more business. But because we were first timers and because we'd never raised venture money before, we couldn't convince people of that. And so, you know, we talked to a couple dozen people, all no's, and we say, oh shit, we're going to have to change some things. And so in a sort of mad dash, we implement a admittedly suboptimal monetization scheme, a subscription model, which we knew was wrong and wouldn't scale, but would prove to folks that we could raise money. In the nick of time, so we have sort of maybe a month or two of data of the subscription model, we're able to get 2 people to sort of commit, and that drives enough of a process for us to raise our Series A. And in talking to Javelin, the firm that did our round, you know, they'll tell you like, yeah, ultimately, we just bet on you guys. We knew that the model didn't quite work exactly the way it should, but you guys seemed like you had a lot of hustle. You sort of fought through this challenge, and you just went for it. And so even then, they were really just betting on us. And that was a really searing moment in the company's life. So first off, we almost died. 7 out of the 8 or 9 of us that were there at the time ended up not taking a salary for the last 3-4 months. Because there was no more money. The company paid for the house that most of us lived in and paid for all the food. So like basic necessities were taken care of, but the rest was really not there. But this did a couple things. First off, it forged our identity as being very mission driven. Because if you didn't give a shit about what we were doing and the mission that we were chasing, you would have left. We weren't paying you any money. There was not even much hope of a grand outcome, but we believed in the inevitability of this vision, and we refused to give up, primarily because we looked around us and we didn't see anybody else doing it in the way that we thought it needed to be done. And so the worst feeling was seeing our dream sort of still there and unchallenged, but losing faith in ourselves and our own ability to achieve that dream. And in those moments, teams, I think, either rally together or they break apart. And I feel lucky to be surrounded by a group of great people, and we really rallied together. We got very honest with ourselves about what we were good at, what we were bad at, what was good about our company, what was bad about our company, and it created a sort of value and focus on getting better and really improving ourselves as an organization, because we wanted to go out and be able to achieve this dream and be able to work on it for a long, long time to come. So it taught us a lot about us. It taught us a lot about raising money. We got a lot better at raising money after that. And you know, now I can say it was worth it. At the time, it did not feel worth it. But now I can say it was.
Thank you. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your vision looking ahead. And you know, you're right smack dab in the middle of work. What do you see as the future of work? How is the way that people, probably not the folks in this room, you know, focusing on software, but for the rest of the country, mainstream, how is work going to change over the next few years, decades?
I don't know if you guys saw this report that came out. McKinsey published a big report on Monday about the future of work, and the sort of headline point is now 55 million Americans, by their estimate, are independent professionals of some type. Freelancers, small business owners, independent contractors, people who are making a living sort of outside of the typical confines of a full-time employer-employee relationship. We believe that this is emblematic of the future of work. Ever more folks are going to be in this type of arrangement. They have some talent, right? Some ability to do something in this world better than the vast majority of other people, and they are going to sort of set out on their own with that talent and connect with groups and customers and individuals much more ephemerally than they have historically to provide that talent and sort of earn a living doing it. We see ourselves as being a major driver of that trend. If you think about all the service professionals in this country, they're great carpenters, they're great cleaners, they're great chefs. They're often not great online marketers. They're often not great small business administrators. And the truth is they shouldn't have to be. Being a great chef has nothing to do with being good at AdWords. And so by abstracting away the challenge of finding customers and ever more running their business, we let these people focus on what they do best. And lets us sort of really abstract away the rest and, you know, provide a platform through which they can all flourish on. So our dream is that for anybody with time and talent and a bit of hustle can go into business for themselves, can connect with enough customers, and earn a solidly middle-class income all on their own. And I think, and I hope that technology ever more will provide that future for people. And this, look, I think this is happening in the software world too, right? The open source community is much more of a sort of collection of independent actors, independent contributors to this big project. And you think about all the tools that, you know, we at Thumbtack and all these other companies here use, many of them are created in open source communities. So I think this is a trend that you're seeing sort of broadly, not just in the local services sphere, but there's a general sort of atomization of work that's happening, which I think is pretty neat and something that we should be supporting.
Can you give an example of one of the hard/interesting problems that your product development team is working on today, so we can have a sense for what you're up to?
So I'll give you one sort of product design challenge and one sort of product engineering challenge. On the product design challenge, something that is part of almost every job is scheduling an appointment. And you say, okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of finding a mutually agreeable time. But that's actually an immensely challenging thing to do efficiently. Who goes first? How many suggestions do they offer? Do you offer the other person an ability to make an exception to that? Do they only get to pick one of the three? What if the time is not right? How do you deal with all the exceptions in an elegant and efficient way? This is a tiny little problem that we're grinding on right now, but it takes so many iterations to get right and to get sort of smooth. And to do it really right requires building out an immense sort of deep sort of set of infrastructure to make that match as efficient as possible. So ultimately, what we're doing is building out a whole calendaring app for our pros. Because the best and most seamless way to offer the customer the ability to schedule jobs is to have all the availability of the professionals to be able to instantly show to them. But that's an enormous effort for this tiny sort of feature, at least sort of in number of pixels to the customer. And it gives you an example of the type of product design challenges that we face sort of day in and day out. People often talk about HCI, right? Human-computer interaction, where you're trying to design software to be useful to a human. Well, I say that we have an HCHI design challenge. We mediate two human beings through a piece of software, and that's a vastly more sort of intricate and complicated and ultimately fun design challenge to go solve. On the engineering front, another one is sort of our matching algorithm. So given a specific request, a customer looking to hire a professional, which professionals do we introduce them to? Well, ultimately, there's 3 factors that we have to take into account, and we ultimately model these separately. First off, it's the customer affinity. So who's the customer most likely to hire given what we know about that customer? Their zip code, the specifics of their request, maybe the device that they inputted that request on, everything that we can use to build a model to predict who they're going to want to hire. Separately, you have to look at each individual pro and say, how likely is this pro going to be interested in doing this job? That's a sort of a separate look because you have to take into account their travel preferences, where they happen to be, the other jobs that they have, the jobs that they've done historically. And then finally, you have to take the Thumbtack sort of hat and say, who do we want this job to go to make sure that we're spreading the dollar value of this marketplace efficiently around the number of different professionals such that they all get enough value out of Thumbtack. And so the customer hat, the pro hat, and the marketplace hat are all 3 different models that have to be created and tested and iterated on, and then they have to be integrated, and you have to sort of decide how to balance it in different markets. You care about different things. If you have very rich supply, you need to balance the marketplace dynamics more. If you have very thin supply, then you privilege the customer more, and this is something that we're constantly tweaking and building and iterating on. So those are 2 of a product design challenge and a more engineering challenge that we're facing today, which are a lot of fun to work through.
Cool. One more question, and then I think we'll turn it over to the audience for questions for a couple minutes. And that question is advice. You've given a couple tidbits of advice along the way, but if you were in the audience today, what's the number one thing you would have told yourself back then? Well,
I won't answer that I talk to a lot of people who are evaluating Thumbtack as a place to work and have a lot of options. All of you will have a lot of options and places to go work. I can guarantee that. And you will often achieve that because you are very sort of driven, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but type A, right? Like, you're thorough, you're methodical, you work hard, you get good grades, you find a great list of companies, you network yourself in, you practice for the interviews, you do well, you get this job. I don't believe that the process that made you successful at getting those options is necessarily the right way to choose the final one that you pick. And the reason I say that is being sort of methodical and mechanical doesn't tell you what to do. It can tell you what not to do. You can say, hey, is this an industry I want to work in? If it's no, then cross that one out. Is this a location I'm willing to work at? Is this a type of business, type of culture? You can take a heuristic-driven approach to saying no. But once you're going to be left with a set of options, sort of 2, 3, 4 companies that all meet your standards, how do you pick the right one? And I don't believe there's any way to sort of create a function that you can use to put these things through and get an output and make a decision. I think going back to the Steve Jobs advice, I think you have to trust your gut. You have to realize that sort of the feeling that you have in a place and your sort of emotional reaction to it is something that you should trust and not something that you should shy away from. So put your sort of methodical, logical hat on to weed options out. But once you've got that short list, remind yourself that they're all great options and trust your gut and pick the one that really just feels right and not the one that appeases either your own or somebody else's preference for what you should pick, because there's not a right answer. There's only the right answer for you.
That's a great point. All right, why don't you think of a couple questions? I was, as we were talking about the market size that Thumbtack has in front of it as an opportunity, it reminded me to mention that this is a really unique time in software because for the first time, finally, offline markets have really been opened up to technology companies. So as a technologist, you can go after the largest markets out there. And the $750 billion opportunity for Thumbtack is so much bigger than, for example, the online advertising market that both Google and Facebook go after. And there's a lot of market cap that's been created there. And so we have a few great companies from this kind of offline category that's bringing offline markets online in terms of the ability for software companies to address them at the conference. So we have Lyft, Thumbtack, DoorDash. Yell out if I'm missing anyone else. But some really great examples. So if it's an area that you're interested in, you should talk to those companies. Questions for Marco or for me?
Imagine if it's day one of starting Thumbtack. How would you recruit someone? How would you sell your vision to someone on day one or day zero of starting Thumbtack?
So early on at startups, you're not recruiting somebody so much as partnering with them. I'd argue that anybody who joins pre-product market fit should be considered a founder because they took a bet on this thing sort of taking a step change improvement that was really not obvious and not given to happen. And so it's something that is very, it's no different than making a close friend or falling in love with somebody. And it's not like a sell process. You really are just spending a lot of time together. And it should feel easier the more time you spend together. It should feel more fun the more time you spent together. So the first guy we recruited to Thumbtack, we met on a kayaking trip. He had gone to college with a buddy of mine from high school. This high school friend of mine organized this trip. This random guy was on this kayaking trip, and we just were sitting in a kayak talking. And we just couldn't stop talking about...
Sounds like love.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you just nerd out, and you get excited, and you're
Nerd
like,
love.
oh my God, I hadn't thought of it that way. And they get like, oh my God, that sounds so interesting. Did you think about that? Did you try this? And it's not like it's not a recruiting process so much of a partnership effort. It's like, oh man, like we would do better together than not. So like, come on.
How are you going to say no to that?
Yeah. It's an intimate relationship. It is not a casual thing to start a business with somebody.
It is true. That's absolutely true. Another question right here?
So a lot of companies we know, like they have the luxury of sort of controlling the customer experience from like the customer pipeline from beginning to end. So like, for example, like using Amazon, the user just searches online and from searching to the shipment, the user knows what to expect. But for Thumbtack, I think it's a little different because they use your software, but then a third party comes in and they might not be happy with that experience. So how do you solve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first off, you're absolutely right that our brand is as much about the product experience that our customers sort of use and see as it is the experience the pro gives into that customers. So there's no one answer. First off, we manage the supply. It's not an open marketplace. We allow people to come in who meet our standards. We police it very proactively to make sure that pros are meeting our community standards and the sort of experience standards. And then finally, we educate. And thankfully, these pros want to deliver a great experience. They know that's what drives great reviews, great word of mouth, ultimately great repeat business. So our incentives are fundamentally aligned, but we need to do the legwork of helping train them. The great thing is that these folks are professionals. These aren't sort of amateurs just sort of trying to be a carpenter one day. These folks know what they're doing, and so we don't have to get them from ground zero to being a good sort of professional. We get to meet them very far along that path. And the pros who succeed on Thumbtack are the ones who are just naturally good at it. So there's some amount of self-corrective action on the marketplace. The people who get the best reviews provide the best customer service, and that's where most of the next crop of customers ends up going. But it's actually something that we love, that we have this giant sort of chain that we have to manage and optimize for, because that creates more opportunity for us to build software, build product, to build Thumbtack into an ever more differentiated experience. So huge challenge, but also in that huge opportunity.
Do we have time for one more question, BT team? Yeah?
I'll stick around afterwards if you guys
Young
want.
lady up here.
Hi. So you mentioned that you shouldn't necessarily follow your passions if that's not what the world cares about. So if that's the case, then how do you look for cool ideas to tackle? And like you mentioned that you're looking for an idea for a business. How did you come about deciding to work on connecting people with local services? Was that something you were passionate about or had a lot of experience with?
Yeah. So first off, don't trust people on a stage too much. Make your own decisions. Meta advice for the weekend. But the second point, and the reason I say that is because I think we've done a disservice to people saying that you should indulge your own passions without forcing yourself to recognize how those passions align with what the world wants. Because I do think it's great to provide value and sort of create something that other people can use and sort of make an impact. It's something I value. Maybe others don't, but it's something that motivates me. So I think the biggest mistake that founders make when they start hunting for an idea is over-indexing on themselves. So my assumption is that if you're a likely successful founder, you are not normal. You are weird in some fundamental way. And therefore, you shouldn't extrapolate too much about your preferences about the world to the rest of the world. With the one exception is if you're your own customer. So if you're a developer and you're building a developer tool, great. Then you are the customer and you can sort of build for yourself. But if you're building a consumer product, be careful to assume that you as a consumer are like every other consumer. And so what I would encourage people to think about is to look out into the world and say, what's broken? What's inefficient? What do we think in 10 years someone will look back upon and say, wait, you had a hard time hiring a plumber? It'd be like today us going back to someone 15, 20 years ago and being like, oh my God, you had to go to a library and physically go to a card catalog, find the reference, walk into a stack of books, pull the book out, go to the index, find the page to get to a quote. Like, that's crazy. Now we have Google, you type it in, it just shows up. So what do you think in 10 years, 20 years, people are going to look back on and be flabbergasted that we put up with that type of inefficiency? I mean, I think one thing that's happening today is like dating, like meeting people through online mediated sort of dating. It is now the second source of marriages, in that couples now cite dating apps as the second most likely source for how they met, behind meeting through friends. And it's set to overtake meeting through friends in the next 5 years. But part of me thinks back and it's like, wait a sec, you mean that back in the day you would just go to a bar with your friends and hope that you randomly met the person that you're supposed to like marry and be with for the rest of your life? That's crazy talk.
So awkward.
Yeah. So it's this kind of like, you have to sort of forget the current confines and say, like, what are people going to look back on and say, man, that was crazy. I can't believe you put up with that. It's so dumb. There should just be a better way. So I don't know if that helps, but look out into the world. Try to find something that's broken, and more so is so broken for so many people that creates a potential energy that if you fix, you can sort of suck in a huge amount of demand and intent for your offering very quickly.
Great. Marco, thank you so much for being here.
Yep.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks,
and your
Brian.
comments.
Thanks to you guys. Thanks, sir. All fun.